First of all, I just want to say what a treat for me, because I am from Aberdeen. I studied my bachelor's and my master's at Aberdeen University, and I've spent a lot of time in this room in evenings and weekends doing sort of data meetups and hackathons. So this is, home ground for me. I'm very happy to be here. Thanks for having me, really. And actually, one of the one service that I'm going to talk about today, Open Data Scotland and OpenData.Scot in particular, a lot of it was built in this very room. So this is very, very topical, very local to Aberdeen, right? So I won't do too much of a background for myself as well, because we will have the panel come in after this, and then I'll talk about what I've done over time. This particular talk is about open data in particular. I do want to say, first of all, or one of the few things I will say is I actually wear quite a few hats. My biggest hat is my day job, where I work as Senior Analyst at Forecast, which is a consultancy based in Edinburgh, and we focus on solutions for commercial use, so sort of commercial companies, if you will. I didn't explain that very well. The biggest hat that I have is being maintainer for Open Data Scotland. Now, Open Data Scotland is a community project. It is created by community for community. It's for all of us who use open data. It is something that I do in my spare time. All of us who work on it volunteer on the project. None of us are paid to be there. It's a very, very lean project, because the labour, which is the biggest cost of it all, is all free, because we all do that for free. So it only costs us about £140 to run the project a year. £30 of it is our domain, and the rest of it is analytics. So all of this that you're going to see later that I'm going to cover is all built by volunteers. And if it's crap, please excuse it, because it is all built by volunteers. We don't have the resource behind it, but I still think it's quite a good service, right? Could I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So Open Data Scotland, our main interface is this OpenData.Scot website. And our objective really is to make open data in Scotland easier to find. Because this is one of the biggest complaints we have as data practitioners. We're like, where's the data? We don't know where the data is. You're like, do you know where this data is? And you have to rely on someone else to tell you, oh, this organization publishes data like that. Why didn't you go there and get that? So we were trying to list it all together in one place so it'll become easier to find. So if you're looking for something that might solve your problem, you could come to a location like this to hopefully find something that might be similar. Now, we started off with listing local authority data. There are 32 local authorities in Scotland. We're very lucky in Scotland, we only have 32. England have got like 300 odd. So for us, 32 was a nice small number that we could work with that was complete, because we could look at the whole set and say, 32 local authorities, do we have them all? Now, I'm happy to say we have 31 of 32. The one that we don't have is Orkney. And every time I talk about it, I keep saying I need to email them, and I keep not doing that. So Orkney is the only one we don't have. But we also have other organizations on here. Research Data Scotland are one of our organizations on here who publish data sets, and we have in this listing. Now, the total number, this is this morning's number, 1,854 data sets. That's how many we have listed at the moment. This is all purely Scottish publishers. This does not include yet stuff that comes at UK level. So we don't have UK data sets that contain Scottish data. And we still have maybe about 6 or 7 publishers that we know of that are on the waiting list to get added. We just haven't got to it yet. So this is really one of the biggest learnings that we've had when we put all this together. It was just how much data sets there were out there that you just didn't know, nobody really knew about. You maybe saw 3 or 4 on a static website on your local council's page, and that was it. But when you start to put them all together, actually there's quite a lot of them. Now, this number 1,854 changes every week. We have a pipeline that refreshes every week. It brings up the new data that gets published that week, and it takes away the old data sets that get removed from those councils. So that's an ever-changing number. It also changes the most when we actually add new publishers to it. So when we have a new source of data to it, that number goes up. Now, thankfully, since because we've been having this pipeline that runs every Friday that does it, we don't do it manually. It was one of the very important things that we built into this thing. We wanted it to automate, to run automatically rather than have someone sort of manually sit there and refresh it. Because this runs on a schedule, we actually now have a very nice picture over time as well of what is changing over time. We've had this project is now 2 years old. We've maybe had the pipeline for about a year now. And so we've got a nice little picture of like what happens, what gets removed, what gets added. Oddly enough, actually, the biggest shifts are when publishers change platforms altogether and don't tell anyone about it. So you're about to find, you just go, where has it gone, right? So I probably talked a bit more about that than I intended to, but the project as a whole, although we do this listing and although we maintain this site, one of the things we really want to do is actually talk about how open data is used. So not just about finding it, but who's using it, how and why, because you can have all this data listed. What's the point if you don't actually do something with it, right? So this is kind of what I'm going to focus on a bit today. One of the other things that we do besides this is also all this outreach stuff. So this is why I'm here talking about it, because I want, one of the things that we found is people use open data, but don't know they're using open data, right? They don't recognize the term open data. So when we have a call to action on open data work, it just never gets heard because you don't recognize the term. So this is part of the effort here. Now, could I have the next slide, please? Thank you. Right, so earlier this year, I think it was February or March, I can't remember, I was at the Scottish AI Summit in Glasgow, and this is me sitting here looking at the floor. All photos of me at the event were me looking at the floor. So don't do that if you're sitting on the panel. But the reason why I was here was I was helping out friends from a company called UBOK. They are based in the Aberdeen Centre in Edinburgh, if you're familiar with them. They're doing really great stuff, but they were hosting a workshop in building inclusive AI language, dialect and diversity. It was about different language in large language learning models. That was specifically the kind of area they're looking at. Now, all of us who were there, it was a workshop, we all had a table, different people at different topics. My particular topic was about openness and what people would need to feel comfortable as consumers of AI products. And does openness help you in that? We're talking about the language of understanding what your AI product is doing. But just to kind of set the scene, I asked the question first. So there'll be about 20 of us at this table. I said, how many of you know what the term open government is? Nobody raised any hands. How many people know what open data is? There were maybe like some hands. How many people know what open source is? All hands. Right, everyone knows that. And yet, funny enough, they're all very, very similar concepts. Open government, open data, open source. So can I ask the same question here, but just for open data? How many of you know what open data is? Some hands, right? But more, I think more than we had at that group. If I could have the next slide, please. Right, open data, by definition, is just anything that you can use without restriction. It's free, there's no constraint on it. There's no requirement for you to declare that you've used it or to tell the person that you're using or to ask permission for it. It's there. Now, another thing that's probably very interesting about open data is, or if I kind of bring in the concept of open government as well, if I can have the next slide, please. Open government in particular is about the practice of, opening up what government is doing so that citizens feel like they understand what's going on. And a lot of that is in being able to relay that information to them. So open data is a big part of the sort of openness of government, but it's not all that. If I can have the next slide as well, please. Open government in particular, we're talking about like transparency and accountability. You want to see what people are doing, and you can't see what they're doing if they don't tell you what they're doing. So this is where the whole open data piece comes in, right? But I really like this last line here that says the use of open data technologies does not necessarily equate accountability, right? Which is an interesting thought. But I also want to cover something, which is that open data, we tend to think about it in terms of public sector. The government must release data, census data is all public data, right? Open data does not have to come from public sector, because if you remember the definition of open data, it's just data that's free to use. There's no requirements on it. That means private sector can release open data. Third sector can release open data. I can set up a sensor here and count the number of people walking past, release that data, and that can be open data, right? So it doesn't have to come from public sector, but a lot of it does. If you're familiar with the open government license, that's where a lot of our open data comes from. But this is just to remind you that you can have open data from other places too. Yeah, and you can also be publishing your own open data. Right, so I think I'm on to examples. So we, or what I've said so far is open data, lots of different things. It can come from anywhere. We can use it for lots of different reasons. The whole accountability and transparency thing is a big theme throughout this. So what I've got coming up next is a couple of examples that I love of open data in use, because this is exactly what we're talking about. Can I have the next slide, please? Top of my list, every time I talk about good open data use, is Travelling Tabby. Love Travelling Tabby. How many of you know Travelling Tabby? Great. Do you work in healthcare? Yeah, thought so. So coronavirus tracker. Now, Travelling Tabby is one person called John. He was a student at the University of Highlands Islands in the Western Isles somewhere, I'm not entirely sure. One person on his own, I think right time, right place, got in with the coronavirus data that was being published by PHS. I think at a time where PHS were just releasing the data but weren't actually doing any analysis of it. And Travelling Tabby got there right time, started actually building up dashboards, visualizations, helping people understand and make sense of what that data was. And he was making great analysis of what it meant to have all these things. Now, what that ultimately meant was more people visited Travelling Tabby and his tracker than they visited the PHS site. I think because the PHS, Public Health Scotland dashboard came a little bit later. Now, he maintained the site on his own for so long that he was awarded an MBE. The next slide, please. And I think he just picked it up recently, right now. Congratulations to him, because he has done great service. And one person on his own worked with open data and made it so much more accessible for a lot of people. Travelling Tabby, absolutely my favourite story to tell. Scottish story as well. Can I have the next slide, please? Right, this one's a little bit closer to me and where I live in Edinburgh. I live in Leith. We have a big problem with parking at the moment, and Leith Walk and trams and everything. This is SW20, Southwest 20-minute neighbourhoods. I think that's what they're trying to promote more than anything. I can't actually remember off the top of my head what data set it was that they were working off, but they have this nice analysis of parking tickets here. And see, when I read this, I was like, oh my goodness. The big piece was something like, okay, I know it's a pie chart, please forgive that. 48% of tickets are issued to first time or only time offences, which means more than half of tickets are issued to repeat offenders. So people are repeatedly parking in situations they shouldn't be parking in. And it almost becomes a bit of a question of, are you doing it deliberately because it doesn't deter you at all, right? So there's a question about, is the fine system good enough or not? It's not deterring people. Can I have the next slide, please? 48% there, so you can actually see the distribution by some people. 1% would have 10 plus tickets in a year. They don't care, they just go for it, right? But this is really good information to have, because now you start to think about whether or not the system needs to be redefined. Someone has taken the time to look at the data and actually made it make sense and present it in a way that people can understand, but then more importantly, start conversations with it. So you can bet our local councillor has been tagged in this and has had to respond to this, right? So that's a really good part of that. Can I have the next slide, please? Very similar one. This is a terrible screenshot, sorry. But this one is more local to me. This guy, Ed Tiss, that I know him as on Twitter, Edward Tisserman, I think his name is in full. He built a little parking app where people could report where illegal parking was happening, where people are parking on the pavements, parking on double yellow lines and whatnot. The interesting thing that happened here was they had something like 700 reports within a week, and it was just a flood because everyone wanted to put stuff in. Now, it then starts to again drive a conversation of, are we doing enough to deter people from parking? Can we see hotspots? Can we see where they are at different times of day? Maybe again, this whole repeat offender thing. But then a different conversation can emerge from that as well, right? What are the official parking tickets versus the unofficial ones that are being crowdsourced? And is there a difference? And if there is a difference, why is there a difference? So again, you're generating a whole new conversation here about whether or not you should be doing something different. Could I have the next slide, please? Who knows this one? Gender pay gap bot. Could I have a show of hands who remembers this one? Some of you. What a stir it caused last year, International Women's Day, when that bot came up. Can Can I have the next one, please? This is an example of a more recent tweet. Actually, I realized not a great example, because what happened was the bot picks up keywords. It picked up when organizations were being like, we love the women who work in our company, blah, blah, blah. And the bot basically went like, yeah, you don't pay them enough. That was instantly what it did, right? It says women's median hourly pay is 11.2 lower than men's. Now, more recent ones, actually, what they've done, because this started off last year. This year was a bit more muted because I think now the companies know. So either they're avoiding the words or they're being better with it. But also in more recent tweets, they've actually called out what the change is year on year. So you can see whether or not actually that gap is increasing or decreasing. So that's good as well, right? Good for all of us. Now, all of this entire app on the back of open data. Can I have next slide, please? But this is a slight irritation on my part, because it says all publicly available data, again, doesn't mention the term open data, does it? But it is open data. And that is the source there. I've got it really tiny here, sorry, but they do list it there. That is a government provided data set. So again, another wonderful use of open data here, driving real conversation and actually change, you could say, because now the companies are thinking twice about that tweet that they're going to post, right? So absolutely perfect use of open data here. Okay. Oh, I am running out of time very quickly. Okay, right. Could I have the next slide, please? You might recognize the color of this wall because it was taken in this room. This was one of our hack events that we had for Open Data Scotland. Open Data Scotland was built pretty much over hackathons. And one of the questions we wanted to ask was, you know, we have a very good idea of what good open data publishing looks like. We have FAIR principles, we have the 5-star framework from Tim Berners-Lee, right? But they talk about what good open data looks like. But do we know what good open data use looks like? The examples I gave you there, you know, could we all comfortably say that that was good open data use? Why? Because people trusted it, because people, because it drove conversation, it drove change, right? So what are all these different things? But then also, even something like, did it teach you new skills? Does it give our workforce, our incoming entrance into industry skills, very tangible skills that they otherwise wouldn't have had if they hadn't had the opportunities to build these products for themselves, right? So these are all the sort of benefits of the use of it. And how do we start to identify what good open data use looks like? Next slide, please. Right, I'm just going to leave that up here. We asked the question, we said if you could have all the data you wanted and it was all accessible, what would you want? So a few ideas here of what people love to have. Now I'm just putting it up there because you might have ideas of your own, or you also go like, oh yeah, I'd love that. Then in that case, by the end of this talk, I hope I encourage you to actually start doing something about it, or to convince a few friends to help you get involved. Next slide, please. Right, so very quick whistle stop tour because I have already talked over my time. Open Data Scotland, or opendata.scot as a service, if you will. We are, I've mentioned, we are basically all volunteer run. It's a collaborative community. It's all open source. We work off of GitHub, we work off of Slack. Anyone can join. We have Twitter. One of the things we do is the listing. We maintain that. It's a lovely thing that runs on GitHub Actions. We only look at it when it goes down. Not very often, I might say. It's usually when a publisher does something really strange. But another thing that we do is we monitor whether or not publishers' sites are down. So we can actually tell them and be like, oh, your open data portal is not available anymore. And we can start to have those conversations to be like, have you moved it somewhere else? Has it gone down? A couple of them have now come back and gone like, oh, we didn't even know it was down. So it starts that process of bringing it back up. You know, in a way, it's good because it takes away the frustration from regular users of like, I want to get this data, but it never works and it's never there and whatnot. So it's all part of that sort of keeping the whole ecosystem healthy and alive, if you will. Have the next slide, please. This was really kind of why we started. I am very much a data person myself. I definitely have that frustration of trying to find data in the right places. And so this was something that has helped. Actually, it's really irritating. I've built this thing over 2 years and I've never used any of the data sets on it because I'm always looking somewhere else for data sets. But I know other people have. But really, it was on the back of being able to make things easier to find. You shouldn't be spending so much of your time, so much effort looking for the data. By the time you actually start to analyze it, you're tired and you can't be bothered anymore after that. You're so frustrated. Can I get the next slide, please? We're going to skip this one. not a lot to cover there. But this really kind of is what we're doing as a whole, as a project. We've got the listing, we've got the skills. So everything is built by just us, just community. We absolutely encourage students, learners and amateurs to come along and like build very key parts of it. Our main pipeline was built by a second-year student at Aberdeen University at the time, took the whole thing, ran with it, did a fantastic job with it. Stories, this is a lot of what I'm doing today, telling you what good open data use looks like. And another thing that we are starting to have a really good collection of is resources, not only just how do you use open data? How many projects are using open data? But then also publishers have started to come to us and be like, do you know where I can host this thing, or this thing's become expensive now? I think it was Heroku when they put payments on their apps and they're like, oh, what are the other alternatives? And now we have a collection, we have a connection with the publishers to be like, actually, can we connect you with someone else who might have something as well? So we're starting to see both sort of publisher end connections, but also end user connections, but also publisher connections. Could I have the next slide, please? These kind of the three things I was talking about. So if you're on our website, you can look for data sets there. You can learn about open data in Scotland. I've not really talked about this yet, the analytics piece, and you can learn about open data. Now that last tab on the end there, resources, actually, that's where we currently list all of our projects that we know of that use open data. There's a list specifically for Scotland. There's a separate list for UK and rest of the world as well. So if you're looking for inspiration, it's in resources. But also, if you have any great stories, please tell us about it, because we'd love to put it in there. Now, at the moment, it's a static list. We want to make it better in future. We want to be able to link to say, this project used these data sets. Or when you're looking at a data set, it says this data set was using these projects, like have that connection. Love to do that. So that's why I'm really here. We've got the next slide, please. Because I'm trying to convince you all to come and join us, or tell your friends to come and join us, because we need more people to help. One of the absolute best things that's happened out of this was when we first started the project, we maybe didn't put analytics in until about 3 months or 4 months in. It was all very gradual over time. But we now have user stats or visiting stats for over a year now, or just over a year now. And we're now sitting at near 1,000 visitors a month, which to me blows my mind, because when we first started doing this, it was a Google spreadsheet and I was like, oh, 30, 40 people use this, fantastic. Like, very happy with that. And it's just absolutely grown, and it's been organic. But I'm talking about the analytics, the understanding of what open data we have. One of the things that I assumed right at the start of the project was that other people who will look for open data are the activists like myself, SW20, at Tisman, the people who kind of want to do stuff. But like, you're doing it in your spare time because you're so angry and you've got a day job, or you're so angry in your spare time, you want to do something, right? So I assumed people come to the site weekends, evenings. But if you see this here, you see this dip. This is a weekend. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, again, always at the weekend it dips. And this completely changed my perspective, because the whole time I thought it was us, it was volunteers who were doing that. But actually we're starting to see that maybe it's people visiting during work hours. So are people coming to the site looking for open data for their work, for their organization, for commercial reasons? That one we don't know. The whole commercial thing is a whole different argument that I'd love to have another day, but I don't have enough time for that now. Could I have the next slide, please? We also have a lovely community because of all the people who are willing to share resources with us. This is evidence that people come in and get involved. And likewise, if you're looking for something, post, maybe we can help you signpost someone else, but also you might have something that could be helpful to someone else. Can I have the next slide, please? Oh, challenges, love this one. Okay, some of them feel very familiar. Now, this is a whole massive talk by itself. What's interesting as well, as we started to build this, we now have 1,800 data sets. We have basically 1,800 ways of things going wrong. There's a lot inconsistency across the site. And actually, as the project is maturing now, we're seeing different challenges. The challenges are now no longer code challenges. The challenges are, how do we get people on board easy, quickly, so they can understand this complex ecosystem? How do we make sure people get their questions answered? Because it's dependent on me and I don't respond to my emails in time. But you know, there are technical challenges, absolutely. And the great thing is, if I can have the next slide, please. I spoke at the State of Open conference earlier this year in February. This talk is available on YouTube, and you can listen to me talk for 23 minutes about all the things that are inconsistent with the data sets that we have so far. If I can have the next slide, please. My collaborator, Jack, did the same talk, slightly shorter one, at the same conference, the Open conference. This is all about it's a new conference for open technology. So that's open source, open data, open hardware. And Jack's particular talk was about the technology that goes behind or that Open Data Scotland, opendata.scot sits on. So we have those 2 talks there if you want to listen to those 2 other things as well. Could I have some ideas to try and convince you to join us? Because we'd love to have more features. We need more people to add more data sets, more publishers and whatnot. But also, it is a sandbox. You can come and try. Like, if you've got an idea, we can absolutely, if you build it, great, we'll incorporate it. Could I have the next slide, please? Yeah, the wins. Oh, goodness. Last year, November, we got nominated and shortlisted in 3 categories at the Open UK Awards. This was out of my, I never would have imagined it. We had 3 categories. One was for individuals, one was for young persons, and one was for software. And we were up against the BBC. And that was like mad. Obviously, they won. We had no chance. But we did win the Young Tech Person, the Young Person Award. I'm very happy to say Jack won that. And he's been hanging on to that title ever since, because he's like, yes, this is my last year of saying I'm a young person. But he absolutely deserves that. Could I have the next slide, please? Great. This is the last slide. Really, what I want to do here is to tell you, OK, I know it's a data science conference, but data, open data is such a big part of that. And there is so much richness there, just in Scotland alone. I haven't even started looking at like UK-wide data. There's a lot more there than you believe, but there's also a lot missing that you don't expect. So there's a lot of stories that we can uncover here, talking about who's using it, what times of day, what data sets are popular. I can tell you it's HMO licenses from Glasgow. Don't understand why. That's the most popular data set, but none of the other local authorities are publishing HMO licenses. So we don't know if it's HMO licensing that's popular or Glasgow that's popular, because it's got the largest council, right? So these are all the different stories that we would love to uncover as well. So first thing is, I want you to know there's that site for you to use yourself, both in terms of sourcing your own data, sourcing data for your own projects, but also if you want to have a little side project and want to put yourself down as a contributor on an open source project, we'd love to have you on our award-winning project. Hopefully more awards to come. The second one, I think, is the most important one, though. I'd love you all to talk about open data, how you're using it, if you're using it in your work, if you're using it in your project, talk about it, tell us about it. We're happy to shout about it. Because one of the critical things is, imagine you're a publisher who's putting out all this open data. It takes time, it takes resources, right? And then you're told that if you release all this stuff, all the value will come back to you. And then your boss comes to you and says, oh, great, so now you've released all this data. Where's this value that was promised? And you're like, because there's no requirement for people to tell you where it is, and you don't know where it goes because you use it free and without license. You then go, I don't know. I don't know where the data is being used. I don't know what value is there. So it's only when we start to do talks like this, stories right at the start, where I tell you, this person used this and used this and used this, and look at the change that it generated, look at this, all these things that happen. If we don't have those conversations, if we don't start calling it out, what's going to happen is we're going to lose that resource. Because if you can't, you've got 16 things that are going to get cut. If you can't evidence why this one is valuable, it's going to go. And actually, there are a lot of companies, commercial companies, that rely on open data, and they're not talking about it. So if you are using open data, please, please, please talk about it. The last one, sorry, know that you can do a lot with very little. My point being, this wasn't a very big project when we started. It was a goal sheet. It took us about 8 hours to fill it out for like 13 councils to begin with, and then it's grown over time. But it's not a very big resource. We're not doing anything particularly fancy with it. We've just kind of added more and more and more over time. But also all the other examples that I told you about, the bot, the gender pay gap bot, the parking collection, the sort of analysis of the data. You can do very, very, very impactful work with very little to it. You don't have to do the fancy technologies for that, right? You can do a lot with so little. So that's me. I have definitely gone over time. Thank you very much. You can find me on all these things.